So fetch API. So we're gonna there's like kind of a few things that we have to talk about, and they all kind of work together. And I just want to make sure that I'm not introducing too many terms before I really kind of explain what they do. So I have a couple slides. It's going to be hopefully just a high level overview, and then we can get into coding, and I'll go over the assignment, and you'll see how all these four terms kind of fit into what we're working on. So we're going to talk about fetch, what an API is, asynchronous JavaScript, which you all kind of covered last week, and you didn't do it on the assignment. And so this is the first assignment we're actually using asynchronous JavaScript. And so I figured I'd cover that, and then JSON. So just to kind of introduce why we're doing this, so far we've only been doing front-end development. And so front-end basically is code that runs on your computer in your web browser. And when you go to a website, you retrieve that website data, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that makes that website work. Your computer is communicating with a server. All websites are stored on servers, and that's basically how you interact with the internet, is through servers. And so far, all of our code has just been sitting on your computer, and it could run solely on your computer, but it can't interact with any other computers in the world. And with fetch, we can actually use that to interact with other servers. And other servers tend to have databases connected to them. Servers and databases go together. They're both part of the backend. And so if you're building something like Facebook, where you want users of your website to be able to store some data in a database, their computer isn't going to be storing the data. You need to store it in a server or a server computer. And so we're going to be using the GitHub servers to retrieve data, basically all of the projects that you have on your GitHub account. And we're going to retrieve that data in your front-end web app using fetch and display it. And it's awesome. It's cool. So first off, we're going to talk about fetch. Fetch is a JavaScript utility for talking to servers. And it's not too bad. It's, the most basic syntax you can do with it is, yeah, right here. So this is kind of the most basic fetch call you can do. You write fetch, and it's a function built into JavaScript. And then in here, as an argument, you put in a URL. And this is someserver.com. It's not a real website. Well, it might be, but probably not. We're going to be doing github.com, and then we're going to have some extra slashes in there that are telling it to go to your specific GitHub account. But yeah, you call fetch and then pass in a string that has a URL in it. And your browser will go and get some data from that URL. Now APIs. So technically, fetch is an API, and you learned about the DOM API, and GitHub has an API that we're using. And so this term is used quite a lot in programming, and it's what it stands for is Application Programming Interface. And it can be kind of confusing when you first see it, but I'll try to help simplify it here. It's a buzzword. You'll see it all the time. And basically what it means is it's some code that allows you to use someone else's code or server in your own code. So fetch is an API because it's code that basically whoever makes JavaScript work, which is actually the web browser. So Google Chrome or Safari or Firefox, these browsers are running your JavaScript, and whoever makes those browsers, they actually write code that is the fetch API, and that allows you to use their built-in way of fetching data. And GitHub also has an API. And so some APIs you use are going to be in the form of a library, like React would be, well, actually, I think I get to that. I'll get to some examples in one of the next slides. The basic idea of an API is it abstracts away the complexity of some code to make your life easier. And you can think of it like a car. There's a lot going on in a car, and you don't really need to know how all the insides of it work. You don't need to know how the engine works or any of the electrical stuff. You need to know how to use the steering wheel and the foot pedals and the shifters and stuff. And that's about it. And basically, whoever designed the car, they abstracted away all the complexity that's going on behind the scenes. And they give you some simple controls that you can use that do a bunch of things behind the scenes that you don't know about, or under the hood, literally. And so that's what an API does. It is a bunch of code behind the scenes usually, and they give you some simple thing like fetch. And it does a bunch of networking stuff that you don't have to worry about. Some examples of APIs, which we've seen some of these so far. The DOM is an API. It's built into JavaScript, and it is basically a set of functions that allow you to interact with your HTML. Fetch is also an API, and it's built into JavaScript again. React is an API, and it's not built into JavaScript. Well, React is a library, a code library. And so these are all forms of, it's an API that's in the form of some code that's actually in your app. Now, there's a separate type of API, and this term you'll see so much, and it can mean slightly different things in different contexts. So one way you'll see it is in the form of some code that is available for you to use, like the DOM API or the Fetch API, or the React API, which you have to download, but it's still code inside of your project. These other ones, these are server APIs, and you'll also just hear them referred to as an API. And basically, they are a server that someone set up, and you can interact with that server over the internet using your app. And so Google Maps has one. So you can use Google Maps API inside your app, and it gives you a Google map that you can interact with and like through your code and display it on your web page. And so if you want a Google map on your website, you don't have to make, there's a lot of code that makes that work behind the scenes that's really complicated. And Google has a server set up, and you can basically interact with that server, and that's their API. OpenAI has one. So you can basically write your own ChatGPT. The front end for ChatGPT is one part of their app, but the main thing that's doing the work, the thing that has all their like complicated like AI model stuff, that is on their server. That's their backend. And so they have that available. And so that's why there's tons of apps nowadays that have some sort of AI built in, is because these big companies, Microsoft and I think Meta and Google, they're all making their own AIs, but then they're giving us APIs that we can use in our apps. And GitHub has one, and that's what we're going to be using today. And with the GitHub one, we can fetch your projects. Now, to make all this stuff work, we need to know the difference between synchronous and asynchronous code. So far, all the code that we've written has been synchronous, and synchronous code runs one line after the next. So in my little example here, which we're going to see on the next example, asynchronous code, it's going to, you're going to like remember what this result is here, and then I'll show you the difference. But what we're used to is this console.log will happen, howdy, and then we see howdy show up in the console. Then the next one happens, hello, and we see the next one show up in the console. In the console, you can see they appear one after the other, just as you'd expect, because that's how code executes, one line after the next, until your program ends or whatever. So that's synchronous code, one line after the next, and it just happens all at once as fast as the computer can possibly go. Asynchronous code is code that waits for some external task to complete, and then it runs. And so the most simple version is we can use set timeout. This is built into JavaScript. And I know the syntax is a little bit strange here, but basically what it is, we have set timeout. In set timeout, we have an arrow function. And then in the body of that arrow function, we're doing a console.log, howdy. And then comma, the second argument in this set timeout is the amount of time you want to wait for. And it's in milliseconds. So here I have it set to 10 milliseconds. And then I'm doing console.log hello down here. And you'll see in the console, hello appears before howdy. So howdy is up here in the code. It's above hello. So you'd think this would run first, but in reality, we're getting hello before we get howdy. And the reason is because this console log up here is waiting 10 seconds. We have a timeout of 10 seconds, or sorry, 10 milliseconds. And so this second code runs first. This console log runs, and then this one runs. And so it's basically code that waits for something. This code is waiting for this set timeout. And it's essential for when we're fetching data, because your code has to ask a server over the internet for data, and it has to wait for that server to respond. And because it's happening over the internet, your computer isn't just gonna, it's not gonna have the immediate feedback from that computer and know exactly what the data is. It needs to wait. And even though it's only gonna be, a certain amount of milliseconds, like 5 milliseconds, because the internet is fast, that's still longer than it takes to go from just one line to the next normally for your computer. Your computer can go from one line to the next immediately, whereas if you're fetching data from a server, we have to tell it to wait for that data to come back. And so there's just a little bit of extra syntax that we have to use with fetch that tells your computer, I want you to fetch this data from a server and then wait until we get the response. You can just not wait, and what you'll get is an unresolved promise, because asynchronous code uses promises. Yeah, I have it right here. Async uses promises under the hood. You don't really see the term promise that often, unless you're writing your own promises. But in order to use code, like fetch has all the promise stuff for you. So you don't actually have to write a promise. But that's what's going on behind the scenes. But in order to use fetch and in order to wait for a response from a server, there's two syntax you can use. You can use async and await, or you can use .then. And so async and await is kind of the newer, and in my opinion, it's a little bit more clear and concise what you're doing. And what it looks like is you say await fetch. There's a little bit more to it. I kind of simplified it here, but that's basically it. You also have to put async somewhere. You would put this whole thing in a function, and then the function would be marked as async. And then .then is the other syntax, and this is actually what they asked us to use on the assignment today. So we're going to be using the .then syntax. And I think it's kind of intuitive both ways if you just read it. Await is similar to just wait for this to happen. And then is similar to do this and then do whatever is in this then function. And then takes a callback, and a callback is an arrow function, or can be an arrow function. That's how we're going to write it. And it's some code that happens once we get the response back from the server. So it's a little bit of a weird syntax, but you just have to see it a couple times and you'll get used to it. I like async and await more, but both are fine. We're going to use .then here. Okay, and then our last term for the day, I think, is JSON. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Oh, and it's a syntax for transferring data over the internet and many other things too. It's a convenient way to store data. So when you send your data over the internet, or when you're receiving data over the internet from GitHub servers, for example, the data you get is not going to be, or it's going to be in a specific syntax, and that syntax is JSON. And it's basically just a JavaScript object. There's a little bit that separates it and makes it a little different than a JavaScript object. But so here we have a server, and the server is sending data to us in the form of JSON, and then we can parse that JSON and turn it into normal JavaScript objects. So remember, JSON is JavaScript object notation, and the key being JavaScript object. We can easily turn it into a JavaScript object. That's what it's designed for. Is well, it's easy to look at for the most part, and it's pretty simple to turn it into a JavaScript object. And this is what it looks like. So here we have JavaScript. Here we have a JavaScript object that is called dog. And the dog has a property called name and an age of 2, or name of Fido, age of 2. This is a normal JavaScript object. And then here we have the JSON representation of it. In JSON, you don't have a variable name. You just have properties in kind of a base object. And you can have nested objects. So here we lose the information that the variable was named dog, but we still have the information inside the object. And that's not really important. There would be an easy way to, if we wanted, we could store the variable name dog inside this JSON. But it looks similar to a JavaScript object. The main difference is there's always double quotes around the keys, whereas in JavaScript, you don't have to have double quotes around the keys. And really, we're not even going to be directly making or like using JSON. We're going to be converting it automatically to JavaScript. And so you don't really need to know it that much, but yeah, that's what JSON is. So here's how these kind of different things are going to be applied to our assignment today. We're going to be using fetch to get your project from GitHub. Or I should have said, get a list of projects from GitHub. So any projects, any repositories you have on GitHub, we're going to use fetch to retrieve those. We're going to be using the fetch API, and we're going to be fetching from the GitHub API. And these are 2 different types of APIs. It's just a word that people love to use in programming. And the fetch API is just a built-in set of functionality. The GitHub API is actually a server. And the kind of common theme is that it's an interface for interacting with code, with your code. So an application interacting with another application, or some part of an application. It's all just people have designed code to be able to interact with your app. Async, we're going to have to await the response from GitHub. So when we use fetch, we're going to have to wait for GitHub to send back a response. And so that's where we're going to have to be using asynchronous JavaScript. Otherwise, we would make the fetch call and then just immediately continue on in our application, and we wouldn't have a way to notify, basically store that information in a variable once we have it back. We need to wait for the response back from the server to store the variable, or to store like whatever information we get back in a variable. And then the response will be in the form of JSON, and we'll just convert it into JavaScript. So yeah, those are the terms for today, and now we can get to coding if y'all are ready for that. Do I have any questions so far, or is that making sense to everyone?
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And actually, I'll show you. So we're going to get to writing some code. First, I'll show you, this is what I wrote. This is like what we're going to be making. It's not too bad. It's, we got a couple new things in here. But I don't think this is quite as much code as we wrote last time. But yeah, just so you know ahead of time what we're going to be writing, it's going to look like this. So I have my HTML here, and I'll show you what we're still working on, this BMO page. I deleted the section we had last time, I forgot what it was, the skills section, I think. I can't remember. I deleted that.
Form?
What was that? Oh,
like
the message form.
Yeah.
Yep, contact form. Yeah. Yeah. So we're just going to be starting kind of with a blank page mostly, because just to make it simpler. So we have this section for projects, and we're going to be fetching, we have an H2, and we're going to be fetching projects from GitHub and putting them in this unordered list using some DOM methods. And I have a index.js file connected here. And last time I talked about defer, the defer keyword. And then I remembered there's other ways to do this. Some of you might have a script tag that's at the bottom of your HTML, like down here. And that actually does the same thing as having defer. It's two different ways to do it. It's basically saying, wait until all the JavaScript is, or I mean, all the HTML is loaded before you run any JavaScript. Because when we're interacting with the DOM, we want to make sure that all of these HTML elements have been loaded onto the screen. So you can use defer and put your script tag up here, or you can put your script tag at the bottom, and then you don't need defer. Just a side note from last time. Okay, so I'm going to do a hello world just to make sure that we got our JavaScript file linked up right. Okay, we have hello world showing up in our console. So we're good to start writing some code. So we're going to start by fetching, or not fetching. I don't want to use that word for DOM stuff. We're going to be selecting the projects section using DOM methods. So I'll say const projects section equals, and I'm going to turn off GitHub Copilot. Okay. Document dot query selector. Remember, this is how we go and get a HTML element. And we're going to get the projects section, which has an ID of projects. And because it's an ID, we're going to use this hashtag sign. If we were fetching by tag name, we wouldn't need that, but we're fetching by ID. So, and then I'm going to console log this project section variable to make sure that we selected it. Yep, we got it here. Sometimes this shows up as an HTML element and sometimes not. I'm not sure why it does sometimes. But yeah, I always like to console log if I'm ever doing a if I'm getting an HTML element from the DOM, I always like to console log it. It's a super common thing to have go wrong and wonder what's going wrong. And so yeah, always make sure that when you fetch an element from your DOM that you're console logging it. So we want the project section, and we also want this inner unordered list here, this UL. So I'm going to do const projects list equals, and then I can use the project section, and I can use query selector on the project section, so it's only selecting elements in the project section, and I'm going to select the unordered list. And once again, I'm going to console.log to make sure that I got the projects list. Yep. Okay, so now we get to do the fetch. And the basic syntax is pretty simple. We're just going to do fetch. And then here we put in a URL. And in our assignment, we have the URL, but I already did this. And so I'm just going to copy mine. Yours is going to look the exact same as this. It's going to be https://api.github.com. So that's GitHub's API. Users, and then you're going to replace this right here with your username. So my username on GitHub is Rio Redwards. Whatever your username is on GitHub, you're going to replace that right there. And that is actually a fetch, and we're not storing the data anywhere, but our website is actually going to be doing a fetch call and retrieving data from, we're just not storing it in a variable yet. And I can actually show you, this is a little behind the scenes. If you go to the network tab, you can actually see, let's see. Yeah. So in the network tab, you can look at all the different network requests that your website has done. And so I just requested from this URL, we used a GET request. We got a response that is 200. The status code is basically, there's a bunch of different status codes. This is all HTTP. And it's okay. So we got a good response, which means we got the data we wanted, and I can actually look at the preview, and this is the data we're fetching. And this is JSON. And it's going to look a little different. It's like formatted specifically differently because we're in the console, but this is all the information, and it's crazy. There's so much stuff. What we really only want is the names of each portfolio. So this is a list of like all my portfolio, or all my not my portfolios, my repositories on GitHub. And then they each have a name property, and that's what we really want. And so it's an array of objects. Each has a bunch of information, but we want the name of each of those. And first we need to figure out how to store this in a variable. And so we're going to use .then, because if we were to try to store it in a variable like this, if I were to try to do const, response equals fetch, if we were to try to do that, the response, and I could actually show you. This is the problem with not using asynchronous code. This console log is it's gonna log this variable before we actually get the data. And the variable is gonna be a promise. Yep. So that is the response, but we don't want a promise. A promise is basically the server saying, I promise I will give you this data, just hold on a second. And so we're going to hold on a second by using .then. And when we use .then, we don't need to store it in a variable over here. We're going to create well, we could create a variable up here and store it. We're actually going to do all of this stuff in the .then. So .then is going to take a arrow function as a parameter, which I know arrow functions always make things scary and crazy, but that's just the way of JavaScript. So .then and then an arrow function, and then we open up this arrow function. This is the function body right here, and this is we're gonna write more code. The .then is actually gonna have a response. This can be named whatever you want. I could call this blah, and it's gonna have the data we want from the server, and tradition is to call it res for response. You'll see rec for request and res for response. Those are just the people who code like to do shorthand. And so res means response. And I can console log the response in the .then, console.log response. I spelled that wrong. And we can see what that is. So the response is, this is an HTTP, like HTTP is basically, it's the language that the internet uses for everything, basically. So like if you go to a website, the URL will start with HTTP. You can see like right here, the GitHub one, HTTP. HTTPS is the secure version of HTTP. Stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And you don't really need to know it right now. All you need to know is that this is what we're receiving is a HTTP object. And now we want to get the body of that object, which is going to have all of our repositories from GitHub. And so we can say res, and remember, this is going to be in the form of JSON. And so we're going to parse the JSON and turn it into JavaScript. And the way we do that is we do res.json. And I'm pretty sure in the instructions for this assignment, they say use json.parse this.response. I'm not sure what they mean. Like using fetch, you don't, in my experience, you don't ever have to use json.parse. That's a different syntax. I'm not sure exactly. I would have to ask like Tom or something to understand why he's suggesting to use this one. In my experience, I've always used res.json, and that's how you parse JSON when you've received it using the fetch API. So we're fetching from this, and then, oh, I keep on opening my dictionary. I'm sorry. I'm using my trackpad today and just my laptop. Okay, so we're fetching from this. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How do you get that arrow?
Oh, this is just my font.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this
How would you
is
type it?
it's an equals sign and
Oh,
whatever,
okay.
a chevron thing. When I have a specific font that has what are called ligatures, and it basically combines certain symbols together. It also
Okay.
does that with the double equals for me. Instead of looking like two equals signs, and three.
Okay. So
This
you
is
just
just
need
my font.
the equal sign and that
Yeah.
that symbol. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's an arrow
Thanks.
function. And yeah, sorry. I have a font that like does some special stuff to it to make it look like one character. It's actually an equal sign and then that. Okay. Any other questions? Sorry, I've been rambling. Nope. Okay. I will continue on. So just as a recap, we're fetching from this URL, which is a server that GitHub has that they allow you to use to get information about your GitHub profile. Because we're using fetch, we have to use .then so that we can wait for the response. So anything in this .then, which we pass an arrow function here, anything in this arrow function here is going to be it's going to be code that waits for this fetch call to finish and resolve, and then any of this code in here will run. The response is automatically passed through in this argument. And then we're saying we want to turn that response from JSON into regular JavaScript. And so we do res.json, and we're actually going to return that. We're going to return res.json. And now what is kind of crazy is res.json is another asynchronous bit of code. So fetch is asynchronous, response.json is also asynchronous. And so we need to do another .then after this .then. So we have this .then, and then this opens right here on this pink parenthesis, and then closes right there. Right after this .then, we're going to actually do another .then, because when this one returns, the response.json, response.json itself is actually asynchronous too. So we're doing two .thens in a row. And in this one, we're doing another arrow function, and I'm going to rely on my formatter prettier to format this so it looks not too bad. So we have fetch .then, we return, we're parsing the response as JSON data, we're returning it, and then we're doing .then again, and then passing in data. So this data is going to be the parsed JSON. And so if I console log that, that's actually going to be our repositories. And I have a bunch. I have like a ton of repositories on my GitHub. You will all probably have, just a couple or just one. But these are all my GitHub repositories. And so we successfully fetched data from a server, and that's great. And now we have it in a variable called data. And with this variable now, we can use DOM methods to load all this information onto the screen or we can turn it into HTML. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to do a for loop, because the data comes back as an array. And let me just check to make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah. So we're going to do for let I equals 0, as long as I is less than data.length, and then I plus plus. So in this for loop, we're going to loop over every single one of those projects. And remember, data is an array of projects at this point that we got back from GitHub. And so for each of these projects, we're going to loop, and we're going to say, well, let's create an li element, because remember, we want to store each of these projects in this unordered list here. And so in an unordered list, you want li elements, right? Like that. So each project is going to be like this, an li element with a project name in it. And so now that we have that loop, we can create li elements, put the name of the project in it that we have in that data variable, and then load it into this unordered list. And so that's going to be a couple lines of code inside this loop, and we're just going to do it step by step. So we have this loop. We're looping through all the projects. First, we're going to create an li element. So const li equals, and I could actually call this project. Const project equals, let's do document.createElement. And we're gonna pass in a string that says li to say we're creating a list element like that. We're gonna create something that looks like that, a list element in HTML. And inside that project, we're gonna want to put the name of the project. So this is an empty HTML element right here. And we want to put the name of this data array at the certain index that we are in this loop, if that makes sense. So we're going to do project dot inner text equals data, which remember is this array of projects that we just got back from GitHub. Data, and then we're going to index it at I, because we're in a loop, right? And so I is going to be, it's going to consecutively go through each element in this array. And so that's going to be the actual project itself. But what we actually want is the project.name, because each project is an object and has a name variable. So we're going to do project.name. So we're setting the inner text of this new li element to our project name. That's all we're doing here. And then the last step is we want to put this new HTML element with our project name in it into our projects, not our project section, our project list, this UL. So we're going to do project list dot append child. And then we're going to pass in this project, which is an li. And at this point, if I save and pull up my website, yep, there we go. So these are all my GitHub projects. And actually it limits them to like 30 or something. So it's not all of them, but this is a bunch of my GitHub projects, and I'm getting them from GitHub. And they look pretty because I already wrote the CSS for this. Generally, when you get some new data and you load it into your HTML, it's not going to look pretty, but you can definitely write some CSS to make it look good. So that's most of our task here done. The last thing, we want to do some error handling. So whenever you're fetching data from a server, because you're using someone else's server and the internet, there's lots that can go wrong. And we want to do some error checking. And so that's where we're going to introduce another thing, which is a catch. So I'm going to do dot catch. So after so we have these dot thens, right? And then after the last dot then, I'm going to do a dot catch. And dot catch is similar to dot then, except if any error happens within any of these statements here, if any error happens, it'll end up in this dot catch. And the dot catch is going to actually, well, it's going to be an arrow function like the other ones. So I got the arrow like that. And then we're going to pass in, here we passed in the response, here we passed in the data from parsing the response as JSON. In this dot catch block, we're actually going to pass in ERR. You'll sometimes see error. We can do error. This, again, with any of these variables, you might see them named something different. But as long as it's a variable, the first variable in your arrow function, in these things, it'll have the same data. So it's up to you to decide what the name is. We're going to call this error. And so in our catch block, we're saying if this fetch, if for some reason the server doesn't give us what we want, it's going to end up in this catch block. We're catching the error, and we could say, well, we could just console.warn or you could console.error. Let's do console.warn error. There's console.warn, console.log, console.error. Those are all slightly different ways of logging something to the console. It doesn't really matter. We could do a console.log, but console.warn is good. So now if something wrong were to happen, we'd expect it to end up in this catch block. But actually, and I just found this out yesterday as I was running through this assignment, fetch will always succeed. Even if you fetch from, like, even if I mess up this URL, even if I delete like half of that, this is not gonna be a real URL anymore. It's not gonna work. It's still not gonna end up erroring out though. It's not gonna end up in this catch block. And the reason is because fetch will never error. That's just how it was designed. And so what we want to do is throw our own error if we don't get what we want. And so we can do that in this .then. What we get from this initial like fetch from the server, we get an HTTP response, and it has we could do res.ok. This response is going to have a property called .ok, and .ok is going to tell us whether it's good or not, basically. So I'm going to do an if statement. I'm going to do if not res.ok, which is the same as if res.ok equals false. But the exclamation point says not. So we're going to say if not okay, we're going to have something happen in our if statement. We're going to throw an error. Throw new error. And then in this error, I can say something went wrong. And I could do a little cryy face. So now basically what this is saying if whatever we get back from GitHub is not good, which could mean the URL was wrong, or it could mean GitHub servers were down, or whatever, this res.ok would not be true. And we would end up in here. Again, opening dictionary. And then we're going to throw an error. And throwing an error basically makes your code error out. And we want that because we want to end up in this catch block. This is just the convention for how you would generally do this. And now this error is going to have whatever message is put right here. And so now on my website, if I were to like put in a wrong URL, I'm pretty sure this will work. It'll console.warn. Let's see, is that our? Sure. I'm gonna do a console.log and say like, hello in the catch. I'm just gonna check and see if this is actually working. Yep. Okay. So we're ending up in this catch block right here, which we're only going to end up here if we throw an error. We're ending up here because I messed up the URL. So I'm going to undo so that the URL is good again. And now we won't get that error showing up. And I think that's basically it. I had one more thing, which is in the catch block, I was creating, yeah, I could do that really quick. We have a little bit of extra time, so I could do, I'm going to create an element that's an actual like DOM element, and I'm going to store the error message in that DOM element so that the user can actually see what our error was if we get one. So I'm going to do const error element equals document.create element. And I'm just going to create a p tag. And then I'm going to put the inner text p dot, sorry. P dot inner text equals, or wait, no, it's not, sorry. Our variable is called error element. So I'm going to do error element dot inner text equals, and then we're going to say it equals the error dot message. Because this error right here is going to have a message on it, and that message is going to be whatever I put right here. So it's going to be something went wrong. So we're creating a p tag. We're putting the error message inside of it as text, and then we're going to want to load it into the DOM. And I'll load it into the project section. I'll do project section dot append child, and then put that error element inside there. And now if we error out, then I'll get that error message showing up in the actual DOM, and I'll show you what that would look like if I mess up this URL by just deleting a big chunk of it. There we go. So, oh wait, we're not getting the error I expected. Failed to fetch. Okay. That is an error message, so we did that right. It's not the one I expected. I expected it to be, oh, okay. So fetch is actually the one causing this error this time. Yeah, I guess I didn't do like enough research on how fetch works, but fetch sometimes will error out, apparently. And sometimes you have to create the error yourself if res is not okay. The response is not okay. Let's see, if I did repos, if I misspelled repos, say I did that. There we go. Now we got something went wrong. So it's not going to be a 404 error anymore, which would error out on in the fetch call. This is going to be our own custom error that we wrote. Okay, but we don't want it to error, so I'm going to make this URL good again. We're still getting an error. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now we're loading up our projects and everything is good and we're done with the assignment, I think. Okay, how is that? How are you all feeling? Good, bad? Do you want me to go over anything again, clarify?
Pretty good. I feel like you just need to practice it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, you know, every week we're seeing some new weird syntax, I know. Eventually you get to the end of learning the new weird syntax and you just start getting used to what you've learned, but there's a lot to learn. And yeah, this is another pretty weird one. But luckily it's going to look pretty similar most of the time you want to fetch data from an API. It's going to require some asynchronous code, some .thens. It's going to require some catches. I could show you how to do this all with async and await, which would be a different syntax for fetch or for asynchronous code. But I don't. You're not doing that on this assignment, so I figured I'll just skip it.
Thank you, Rio. That was really helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Rio.
Yeah, of course.
I understand the code, but it's not working on my project.
Sure. Well, I could try troubleshooting with you if you want.
Yeah, I know that we're almost at time for you, so just wanted to flag that. I can stay longer if you can.
Yeah, I can stay long.
Okay. Should I, how should I share?
Yeah, I'll just stop screen sharing and you can screen share. And yeah, if anyone else wants to stick around, it could definitely be useful to like see how we sort through this, because there's definitely a lot that can go wrong, and I want to make sure we're yeah, addressing what can go wrong.
Really quick for you. Are you going to share your repo as well?
Yeah, I'll put it on Replit and share it. And then I also recorded this lecture today, so I'll put that up on YouTube.
Thank you.
Yep.
If folks have questions before me, they can go, because I'm not really on I can stay longer.
I have a question. Is it okay if
Yeah.
I ask something about Git?
Sure.
Because on the assignment, they make us create a new repo for the API project, right? So I can share my screen. Wait a minute. Do you see my VS Code?
Yep.
So I am now in the new like folder API project, and I don't know how to go back to the portfolio project.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I can only switch to branches to main, branch to main, but I don't know how to do other projects.
Yeah. So that you could do just in a separate VS Code window. So if you go to File up on top, and you could do Open Recent, and you should have your, yep. If you click that, it should bring up.
Oh, okay, that's easy. Thank you. That's all my question. Thank you.
Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Sure.
Okay. Now I'm like, I don't know if it's in the right, oop, can you see it?
Yeah.
So I put the code that we wrote in the portfolio project. Was that not the right place to put it?
No, or the portfolio. Yes. Yes, we were doing it in the
Okay.
portfolio. Yep.
Oh, okay. Let me try to see something. So when I run this code, let's see. Let me just do this and I'll just fix it. Okay, so this is my portfolio. I don't know why the skills keep disappearing, but yeah, then the project section is not showing anything.
Yeah. So the first thing I like to do when it's not working how I expect is I open up the console, and it'll usually show you an error if there's something going wrong. And the console would be in your browser, and you can open it by right-clicking and doing inspect. And so, yeah, if you click on console, okay,
Oh,
so
interesting.
we have an unexpected token, and it'll even tell you the line number. So it says JS 10 102.53. So I think it would be
Wow,
on line
okay.
102. So if you look at line 102, there you go. So you have a colon instead of a semicolon.
Oh, okay.
And also the errors will appear in like one order, or one error a lot of times causes a whole series of errors. And
Right.
so generally look at the first one and address that, and it usually, or a lot of
And
times will fix a
rerun
lot of
it.
other errors. So yeah, rerun it. So you'd want to save it, and then I don't know if you have live server. Yeah, you do. So if you have live
Yeah.
server, then you don't need to.
It doesn't work for me though. I don't know why. When I try
It
to
should,
refresh.
if you save it, it should work.
Oh, I'm not saving it. Okay.
Yeah.
So my skills are back. That's good.
Okay.
But so the projects aren't loading, but truthfully, I don't know if I have any projects in GitHub.
Well, have you put this portfolio on GitHub yet?
Oh, I guess so. So I have the portfolio and also the time zone converter that I made
Yeah.
as
So we should be getting those.
repositories. Oh, okay.
So open up your console again and let's see if you have any more errors. Uncaught, type error, project section is null. I knew it. It's always the when you're fetching elements from your DOM, that is 99% of the errors I see. So which one? One of those things was wrong or was null?
It was
Project section.
Project section. So
So
is this one?
yeah, so go to your HTML and let's make sure you have a section with an ID of projects.
Uh-huh.
You do, it looks like. Section
Right,
ID
here.
projects. And okay, so you do have that. Let's go back to your JavaScript.
Inspect. Okay.
Document.query selector, projects. I would expect that to work, and it's not for some reason. So let's just console log your project section. So you have a console log under both of those. We could just do another one that's for your project section.
Like that?
Yep. And then let's go to your console. Yep, save, and then go to your console.
And then I refresh, right? Okay.
Yep. Okay, so we're not even getting to that console log yet. So you might have referred to project section like somewhere above that. So let's pull open your code again. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's look at the line number in your console. I think that could potentially help us. So if you go back to your browser and look in the console, line 86. So let's go to line 86. Okay, so you want to put the console log for project section. You want to put that above project list, because we're trying to use project section on the next line, and we can't run query selector on project section if project selection doesn't exist. So that's why we're getting an error there.
Okay.
So let's see, and I'm sure it'll be, when we console log, it'll say null. Yep. So project section is not being fetched from the DOM. So let's go back to your code, and we're gonna have to keep debugging this.
Yeah.
Let's see, document.query selector.
Oh,
is it project?
Yes, it.
In your HTML, is it project or projects? Is it plural or singular?
Projects.
Oh, interesting. Oh, it's plural.
Well, it's plural there, so.
Yeah. Okay, so it is plural here too.
Oh, could it be that where's your script tag? If you go to your HTML.
It's right here.
Yeah,
Right?
okay. So you probably want to put defer on that. So after src, after that whole line, put defer, DEFER, and save. And we'll see if that fixes it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I know what I need to do.
That fixed that error.
Yeah. Okay.
We are still getting some more errors though, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see your console again. Cool. So we're getting the right section, and then that UL, we have that, and that's good. Now it's saying a.default.detect store is not is undefined. So that's like a deep JavaScript error. That's something that like isn't code that you wrote. It is probably some result of some code that you wrote. And you can see on the right, it's not even in your index.js file. So there's something strange going on. And maybe if you click the downwards arrow on that and expand that error, we'll be able to see more. Okay, async function next. So it looks like it has something to do with your fetch and your .nexts. So let's go back to your code and we'll check out what that looks like. So we have fetch, blah, 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 dot then, res, if res okay, return res.json, dot then, data, catch. Everything there looks good at first glance. So we might want to do some console logs and seeing how far we get. And so that's one thing that I like to do is console log at one point and be like, did I even get to this line before this error happened? And then we can sometimes pinpoint which error the line occurred on. So if you go to, let's go to line 91, and let's make a console log right above that.
Here?
Yeah. And we can just say res. We could say just hello or something just to make sure but let's do res just to get a little more information. Okay, so we are getting an HTTP response, which we want. And the status is 200 and the okay is true. So the response is good. We're okay. Let's go to the next block in there and see what you have going on in your code. So return res.json, that should be good. And then you're doing a for loop for let I equals 0, I is less than data.length, I plus plus, document.create element AI or li. That all looks good to me. But apparently something's not right there. So let's console log data on line like right above line 97. Yeah. Sometimes people say 96.5 if they want you to make like a new line. So
okay.
I'm not always sure if people will know what I mean if I say that, but yeah. Okay, so we are getting an array and you can open that up and that'll probably be your projects. That's probably the stuff we want. Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that error we're getting might not be related to this. Let's see why we're not. It still probably is. You do have a fetch for a favicon. That would be a result of your HTML, not your JavaScript. But that's separate. Yeah, let's look and see why these aren't rendering to the page. Or are they? I don't think they are, right? Projects list.append child project. That should be showing in your DOM. So is it? I could have missed it if it is. If you want to bring up your website again, I want to see if that's actually showing up because so far it looks like your projects should be. Oh, yep, they're there. So the other errors we're getting are unrelated.
Okay.
And I'm going to say it's probably, you probably have a,
yeah,
you have something in your HTML that's trying to get a favicon that doesn't exist. And so that's just an HTML tag you'd want to delete. Other than that, everything looks good. I'd say
Okay.
your assignment is complete.
Thanks, Rio.
Yep. Okay. How's everyone else doing?
Good. Okay. Well, I'm going to head out. Thank you so much. And I
Okay.
will wait for your slides. Much appreciated.
Yep. Thank you. All right. I'll see you all next week, and good luck with this assignment. Feel free to, I'll upload this recording. You can feel free to watch it or look at the slides, and also put the code on Replit. Okay.
Thanks, Rio.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye, y'all.